Welcome to this Python tutorial. I have made this tutorial short and to the point so you can really get started with Python in just 40 minutes. And just before we get started, well, this tutorial is actually a free extract of a bigger Python course I made named Practical Python for Beginners. You can check out the link in the description. Also, if you don't know my channel yet, well, as you can guess with the name, I am primarily focused on teaching robotics programming, so if you are learning robotics, I have many more tutorials for you on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe. And now let's get started with Python. I will first show you how to install Python on Windows, Linux or macOS, and then we will dive directly into the main concepts with hands-on lessons only. Let's start with the Python installation on Windows. In the two next lessons, I'm also going to show you how to do that for Linux and macOS, so feel free to just watch the installation lesson for the operating system you are currently using for the course and skip the other ones. So for Windows, first go to python.org/downloads, so you can see the URL here, and you're going to get to that website. And here you should see download the latest version for Windows. So if they didn't detect your Windows operating system, just click here on Windows and you are going to be able to download it here. So download the latest version, whatever version it is. So it should start with 3 now, but for me it's 3.9.5. For you it can be anything, just download the latest version. It doesn't really matter. Okay, the functionalities are going to be the same for what we need. Okay, so now it's downloading, and once you have the Python executable, you can just open it and click. So just execute the Python executable, and you will get to this menu. Okay, install Python3. And one thing that is very important is to check that box here, add Python to path. Okay, you have to do that. This is an important step. And then you can click on Install Now, and this is going to install Python on your computer. Okay, and then you can click on Close, and Python is installed. What you can do is you can go on the search bar here and search for Python, and you will see Python. So you have a new application, and here you have kind of a terminal with what we actually can call a Python shell. Okay, so I'm going to zoom with Control and the mouse, and you can see your version here. So it doesn't really matter if you don't have the same as me, okay? Once again, the version is not important for this course. The important is that it starts with 3, and then after the course, you're going to be able to choose different versions for different applications if you want to, okay? So here you have 3 angle brackets. You can just use double quotes, hello, double quotes. And if you can see hello here, it means that Python is correctly working and installed on your computer. If you are using a Linux operating system, here are the instructions you need to follow in order to install Python3. If you are using Windows and have already installed Python, you can skip this lesson and directly go to the next section. And note that here I'm not going to show you how to install Linux on your computer. That's outside of the scope of this course. Instead, I'm going to show you how to install Python if you already have Linux installed. So first, let's open a terminal, okay? And I'm personally using Ubuntu for this course, so this is Ubuntu 20.04. And it should work almost the same on all other Linux distributions. So actually the first thing we are going to do before we install Python is to check if Python is already correctly installed, okay? Because for some Linux distributions, you will already have Python with the operating system. So I'm going to do Python -- version. And you can see here, I have Python command not found. And I will do Python3 -- version, and you can see Python. So here I have Python 3.8.5, okay? And the important thing is that you have at least a Python 3 version installed on your computer. So this is actually fine for me. Python 3 point whatever doesn't really matter for this course. And this is actually for Python 2 on Linux, and it's not a problem if it's not installed for now because you are going to use Python 3. So that's a difference with Windows. On Windows, you just have the name Python for Python 3 version. On Linux, you may have Python 3 actually, which is a different name from Python. Okay, and now if you don't have Python 3, so if you get command Python 3 not found here, what you simply do is sudo apt install Python 3. So you run that command, you provide your password, and then you can do Python 3 -- version, and it's going to work. And now to simply run Python, you do Python 3, you press enter, and it's going to open a new shell, so a Python shell, and you can write, for example, double quote, hello, double quote, and it's going to print hello, and this means that this is working. If you want to quit, you can just do quit like this with parentheses, and you are going to quit the Python shell. Here is how to install Python on macOS. So the thing is that right now I don't have a Mac computer available, so I can't show you the hands-on instructions for this specific installation. However, don't worry because I'm going to explain everything in detail, and then you won't have any problem following the course, because once you have installed Python successfully, the course is exactly the same whether you use Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. And actually, Linux and Mac OS are very similar. So the first thing you do is you go on python.org/download. Here, you should have download the latest version for Mac OS, okay? It's going to detect automatically your operating system. If not, you can just go here looking for Python with a different OS. You just click on Mac OS, okay, the latest version, and you can go down and then install. So you have the Mac OS installer, okay? So I'm going to go back here. So you simply click on that download button to download the Python 3 version. So whatever version, it doesn't really matter. The only important thing is that you have Python 3, okay? For this course, it's going to be fine. So download the latest version of Python 3 from python.org. You may have to click on Allow if you get a pop-up asking you if you allow downloads from python.org. So click on Allow. Then find the installer on your Downloads folder and double-click on it. You will have several steps for the installation. Just click on Continue, Agree, Install, etc. for each step. You may also have to provide your password to continue. Once the installation is done, maybe you will be asked to remove the Python installer. You can remove it because you don't need it anymore, and this doesn't really matter for Python at all, okay? So just remove it if you want to. Then open a terminal. So you can go on your Applications, Utilities, and Terminal. In the terminal, you type Python 3 and then press Enter. You should see the Python version you have, and then 3 angle brackets where you can write some text. You can just go and type hello with quotes like this, double quotes, and then press enter. You should see hello printed below. If you have this, then you're ready for the following. And to start with Python, first start the Python shell. So if you don't know how to start it, please go back to the introduction section where you can see the lesson on how to install Python on Windows, on Linux, and on Mac OS. And then come back here for the explanations. So this is the Python shell, and the first thing you can see here is the Python version you have here. So I have version 3, Python 3.9, but just the important thing is that you have Python 3, okay? And then you are going to see here 3 brackets, 3 angle brackets, and that's where you are going to type some Python instructions. So we will see later that you can create complete files with lots of lines of code, which are basically all instructions that are going to be executed. And with the Python shell, instead, you don't write a complete file, you just write one instruction at a time, and when you press enter, the instruction is going to be executed, and in addition to that, the result of the instruction will also be evaluated and printed directly on the shell. So let's just type anything. Let's just type number 3. I press enter, and you can see now I have 3 here. So that was the instruction, which is just a number for now, so it doesn't do anything. But you can see we have the instruction which is evaluated, so of course 3 is evaluated to 3 and is printed here. I can also do hello world like this. So use double quotes for now, okay? Hello world, I press enter and you can see hello world. So here you have your first hello world program in Python. And in this section, we're going to continue with this Python shell to discover variables, etc. And so you can just type literal value like this, and you can also, for example, use Python functions. So there is one Python function which is named len for length, and you have to open and close parentheses and need to give, for example, a string of characters like this or a list. So if I just type hello world like this, here I press enter, and this, as you can see, this gives us 11, okay, because this Python function, which is in the core module, in the core Python module, is going to compute the length of the string here, which is 11. So we have 11 characters, including the space. Okay, and don't worry about this, we are going to come back to that just later. Here it was just to show you so what you can do with the Python shell. So you can write instructions, you press enter, okay, you can press enter, as you can see here, I press enter, and whatever is here will be executed and also evaluated and printed here. Let's start to see how we can use numbers and also operations on numbers with Python. So this will help us when we start to work with variables. So as you have seen, if I just type 2, okay, 2 is evaluated here to 2 and it's printed, so you can see the number 2. So you can use round numbers in Python, okay, 2, 4, you can also use negative number, -3, etc. You can also make computations, for example, 4 plus 5, okay, we can add a space for clarity. And you can see 4 plus 5 is evaluated to 9. Okay, you can also do 7 minus 5, like this, is evaluated to 2. Okay, multiplication is also working, and division. 6 divided by 2 is equal to 3. As you can see here, we have 3.0. Okay, we can also use float number. So let's say 3.14. Okay, you can see 3.14. If I just write 2, I get 2 like this as a round number. If I write 2.0, okay, I get 2.0 as a float number. And you can also use any kind of computation on float number. Let's say 2.5 plus 3.4, which is equal to 5.9. Okay, you can combine operations. Let's say 4 plus 5 multiplied by 2. And you can see this is 14, and now I can also add parentheses to change the order. Okay, multiply by 2, 18. Okay, in this case here, the multiplication has the priority, so it will compute 10, okay, and add 4. In this case, because we have parentheses, then the addition has the priority, so it will compute 9 and then multiply by 2. So, well, if you know basic math operations, you can see that working with numbers is not difficult at all. And let's now see what are variables in Python. So here we have just worked with numbers, okay? And you can see that, so whenever we work with a number, if I want to use number 3, okay, I just print 3, but then, well, the 3 is just gone, okay? What if I want to keep a value that I can use later? Well, I can use a variable. And to use a variable, it's very simple. You first have to give a name to the variable. Let's name the first variable A, and then put an equal sign, and then put a value. Let's put 3. So here, this statement, this instruction is basically put 3 inside the variable named A. I press enter, okay? And here, nothing is printed. Okay, the instruction is just to put the value inside the variable. Now what I can do, I can just write A and press enter, and now you can see A is evaluated to 3. And the good news is that now that I have this variable, I can continue to use it. So whenever I'm going to call a, I'm going to get the value 3. I can create another variable, let's name it b. b is equal to, and I can also use some computation that we have seen before. Let's say 4 times 2. Okay, and now if I get b, b is equal to 8. Okay, and if I get b again, b is equal to 8. And a is still here. Okay, so I can use a and I can use b. Now let's create another variable named c. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this variable from the previous variables that we have. So a plus b. I press enter. And now what do we have in C? We have 11. Because at this time, a is going to be evaluated to its value, which is here 3. b is going to be evaluated to 8. And so C is equal to 11. So you can create variables, and to do that it's very simple. You put a name, equal, and then some value. You can add as many operations you want, and you can also create variables from other variables. Now let's make a test. Let's say I change the value in A. Instead of 3, I'm going to put 5. Okay, and now let's see what we get in C. As you can see, C is still 11. Okay, the variable A has changed to 5, but C is still 11. Okay, why is that? Because simply when we assigned a value to C, we evaluated A at this point, okay, at this time, and that's it. If you change A afterwards, C is not going to be changed. Okay, so the order of the operation, as you can see, is very important. Because now if I do C is equal to A plus B, C will be equal to 13. Okay, because I'm evaluating C, I'm assigning a new value to C after I have modified A. Okay, so here A was equal to 3, here A is equal to 5. Okay, so a variable, you can modify a variable during the program, during the execution. So there is a notion also of time, okay? The variable can have different values over time, depending on if you modify it, of course. Okay, one other thing I want to show you is if let's say I try to get A uppercase like this, you can see we have an error, name A is not defined, okay? Because you have to respect the case, okay? A, B, C. We have defined 3 variables. If I try to just, let's say, test, okay, if I try to get any other name for any other variable, I'm going to get an error. So make sure that you use the exact same name of a variable, okay, when you call it. And then one last thing for variable is that, okay, we use A, B, and C for names for now. So this is nice, and this is good when we want to make some tests or some very simple program. But in the future, when we write real programs, we are going to use meaningful names for the variables. This is kind of your first best practice, and this is maybe one of the most important ones. So let's say you want to store, here we just use ABC for just numbers. Now let's say you want to store a temperature. So if you want to store a temperature, you're going to write, for example, temperature. That will be the name of the variable, is equal to, and let's say 25. So now you have a temperature variable, temperature 25. If you want to store the age of a user, well, maybe you can just write user age is equal to, and let's say 45. And then user age 45. Note that, so this is a convention I'm going to use, okay, with Python, is when you want to use different words for one variable, so this is possible. To separate the words, you are simply going to use an underscore like this, okay? You don't use any uppercase letter, just underscore between any word of a variable. All right, so to recap, a variable is a container that you can use to store a value and reuse that value later. To create a variable, you must first give it a name and then assign a value to it. For now, we have only used round numbers in variables, which we can also call integers. But in fact, there are more types you can use to represent different kinds of data. And let's discover them now. And first, I'm going to give you another useful Python function, which is named type. Okay, so in Python, you have some built-in functions you can use, okay? And to call a function, it's simple. You just write the name of a function and then open and close parentheses. And in the parentheses, you are going to give any parameter you need to give. So sometimes there is no parameter, sometimes you have to give parameters. So here, let's say I give type 3. So I simply put a round number here inside the type function, and this gives us class int. So don't worry about the class for now, okay? Just focus here on the int. So int for integer. So I have my variable a, which is equal to 5. If I do type a, okay, I can also get the type of a variable directly, and you can see type integer. So this is the first type, okay, you have used, and one of the most important. Now let's say type 4.5. This is, as you can see now, it's not int anymore, it is float. So this is a float number. If I do type 3.0, we also get float. Okay, you can see as soon as I add a comma to the number, even if after this is 0, we get a float number. So this is a different data type, okay? Int and float. And so if I do, let's say, e is equal to 4.6, and then I do type e, I get class float. So at any time, you can just use type with the name of the variable to see what kind of data type you have here. Okay, now let's say I do type 4 plus 6. Okay, you can see, so 4 plus 6 will be evaluated to 10, and then 10 will be passed to the type function, and this is going to give us int. Now if I do type, let's say 4.5 plus 4.3, okay, you can see the result is float. And if I do type 4.5 plus 3, so here I am adding a float number and an int number, and the result will be float. So you can see whenever you use a float number in an operation, well, the result is going to be float. So great, we have two main data types for numbers, integers and float numbers. Now we are going to see two new other data types which are representing other things than numbers. The first one is a boolean. So if I write true, okay, if I write false like this, so true with uppercase and false also with uppercase, you can see it's working. This is recognized because those are values you can use, okay? Those are boolean values. So a boolean is simply a data type which only has two values, true or false. And we are going to come back to this actually later when we work on conditions. So that will be very useful to create conditions. So if I do type true, you can see class bool for boolean, and also type false boolean. Okay, and then the fourth type we're going to see here is the string data type. So if I do type hello like this, you can see class str for string. And one thing about strings is that you can use, if you want, double quotes or single quotes. Okay, you can see this is also going to give us a string. So for now, the difference is not that important. I'm just going to follow and continue the course with double quotes like this. But the important thing is that you stay consistent. So if you use double quote, you use double quote at the end. If you use single quote, you use a single quote at the end. Okay, if I try to do, let's say, hello like this, I open with a double quote, I close with a single quote. I'm going to have a syntax error, okay? This is not going to work. So if I just create text variable which contains hello, for example, and then I do type text, I get class str. And one thing that is important is whenever you add quotes to actually anything, this is going to become a string. Okay, if I add quote to 3, this is a string. Okay, this is not an int number. Okay, very important to make the difference. Okay, you can have 3, but this can be a string because you have put quotes. Same for, let's say, 3.0, which 3.0 is a float number, but this is a string, and also type, if I do true like this is also a string. Okay, and one thing you can do also with strings is you can use the plus operator. See, if I do hello like this, plus, let's say, world, so I have added a space here, okay, I press enter, and you can see the result is hello world. So this is a specificity of strings, because of course for a string, it doesn't make any sense to kind of multiply two strings, okay? But you can use the plus sign to just concatenate two different strings and make it just one string, and the result will be a string. Okay, so if you try to do type on this, you will get also str. And this, of course, you can store it inside a variable. You could create one variable for this, one variable for this, and create a new variable where you just add the two variables and you will get the same result. So great, you have just discovered 4 Python data types you are going to use in all your future programs: integer, float, boolean, and string. One thing to note here, you don't need to manually precise the data type when you create a variable. The data type will be automatically evaluated depending on the value you assigned to the variable. And one other super important thing, try not to change a variable data type after you have created it. So for example, let's say I have name, which is equal to ed. Okay, name contains ed, and I can do type name. Okay, this is an str. Now what I can also do, and this is valid in Python, I can just do name is equal to 2. So now name is 2, and if I do type name, I got class int. So the name was before, when I created name for the first time, it was a string, and now it is an integer. This is a very bad practice. Don't do that. Okay, you won't get a Python error when you just assign a new value with a new type to the variable, but this is a sure way to mess up with your program and get a lot of errors later on. So once you've created a variable, stick to the same data type for this variable. And because I have also previously told you to use meaningful names, so let's use a few examples. For example, you have the user age, okay, 45 or like 55. You can use username, for example, let's say Bob, okay. And then if you want a float number, let's say room, temperature, which is equal to 34.5, and let's say is activated, which is equal to false. Okay, so here you have an example with 4 different variables, with 4 different data types, and with meaningful names. We can now use variables with different data types. But what if you want, for example, to keep a collection of 100 temperatures? Are you going to create 100 variables named temperature 1, temperature 2, temperature 3, etc.? Well, this would be very impractical, super long to create, and prone to a lot of errors and headaches. So instead, you are going to use lists. A list is simply a collection of data, or in other words, a collection of variables which are related to each other. So let's create a list so you can see what I'm talking about. So let's name it. We want temperature list, so let's name it temperature list. Okay, make the name meaningful. Don't try to make it too complicated, okay? Aim for simplicity. You want a list of temperature, this is going to be called temperature list. Then you are going to open and close brackets, and you are going to put the values you want inside this list. So for example, I'm going to put 12.3, okay, 23.0, and then let's put a negative number also, minus 12.8, and then another negative number, minus 5.9. So here I have a list. I'm going to press enter. I have a list of 4 different float numbers. If I just do temperature list, I can see the list. So the list is evaluated here and printed on the Python shell. Now, what if I want to retrieve a specific element of the list? In this case, I'm going to use temperature list, and also using directly brackets here and put the index, okay, of the element. Let's start with 1. Okay, you can see actually with 1, what I get is not the first element, but the second element. Why is that? Because in programming, usually we start to count at 0. So I'm going to do, so you can use the up arrow key, okay, to come back to the different instructions you have, okay, so you don't need to write temperature list again. And then I'm going to put 0 instead. And 0 gives me, you can see the first index here. So this will be 0, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so let's get each element. So we have 0, we have 1, let's get 2, okay, which is the third element, and let's get 3, which is the last element of the list. Now, let's say I put 4. What is going to happen is that I have an error, a list index out of range error. Okay, so that's a very common error, is that you have a list and you try to access an element which is outside of the list. Okay, so just remember when you have a list, the first element starts at 0 for the index, and then 1, 2, 3, etc. A nice function you can use to actually get the length of a list is simply the len, so len function, which is a built-in function inside Python. So you just put len, you open the parentheses, and you can put the temperature list, so you can put the name of the list, close the parentheses, and then you get 4. So this gives you the number of elements in the list. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4. And so this information is very useful because you can see that the last index, okay, here is 3, okay, 0, 1, 2, 3. So the last index will simply be the length minus 1. And this can help you avoid getting the index error in your program. Okay, so now we have seen how to get elements from the list. Now, how you can modify an element? Well, you simply do temperature list. You also put, so let's say 0, I'm going to modify the first element. So the same as for getting the element, but then you write equal, and then you can change the value, let's say 2.4. So now if I try to get the value, you can see this is 2.4. And if I print the list, the first value is now 2.4. What you can also do is, if you want to add another element here at the end of the list, okay, add a new element, you can simply do temperature, so write the name of the list, temperature list, dot, and then use the append function, like this, temperature list dot append. And let's say I'm going to add 10.7. So this is going to add a new element. Now I go back to temperature list. And you can see I have 5 elements, okay? And the last one is 10.7. If I do len with temperature list, now I have 5. So now I will be able to actually, if I do temperature list 4, like this, I will not get an error like here, okay? I will get the last element because the length of the list is 5. So here you have created a list with float numbers. But now that you can create a list with integer numbers, you can also create a list containing booleans and also a list containing strings. And one recommendation I'm going to give you is to stick to the same data type for all elements of a list. Okay, if you mix, let's say you use integer and booleans inside the same list, well, you are probably going to have errors in the future. And also this can kind of break the logic. Okay, if you want a list of numbers, you are not going to put a string inside the list of numbers. So stick to one data type for one list. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can ask the user to write something which you can then use and store inside a variable. This will add more interactiveness to the program and makes it more dynamic. And it's going to be great for your Python learning path. So if you want to ask the user to write something, you just have to use the input function like this, open and close the parentheses. So I press enter, and now as you can see, the cursor is on the next line and is actually waiting for you to write something. So let's write test. Okay, and you can see now the result. So what is going into the input function is test, okay, input. If you want, you can also ask the user, so you can ask a question, okay? If you just write input, it's going to wait for an input. You can also give an information of what you want. Let's say choose a number. So now I have choose a number, and I can choose a number, let's say 3. I write 3, and then it is evaluated to 3. So we can actually make it better, just put a colon like this and a space, okay, to make it look better. And as you can see here, if you give a string or if you give a number, the result is always going to be a string with the input function. Okay, if I do type input, let's say choose a number. So here, as you can see, I'm using a Python function inside another Python function. In that case, what is going to happen? The more nested function is actually going to be called first. So input is going to be called, so it will print choose a number, and then this, the result of the input function is going to go in the type function, which will evaluate the type of what you gave. So I'm going to put 3, and you can see now we have type string. Okay, that's an important thing to know, is that whenever you use input, the result you are going to get will be of type string. And well, what you can do is, so let's do input, and I can do, for example, a is equal to input. Okay, so I choose a number, let's say 67. Okay, and now the result of the input will go to the variable a. So if I do a, I get 67, which is of course a string here. But then from that, you can use the input of the user in your program. In some situation, you will need to modify the data type of a variable. So for example, you want to change an integer to a float, or an integer to a boolean, a string to a float, etc. And we have actually a good example here to work on. The input function, as you saw before, always returns a string. Okay, even if you give a number. So then if you need to work with the number you got from the input, you are going to have a problem because, well, this number will actually be a string, not a number. So you need to change the type for the variable, and this is called cast. Okay, you are going to cast the type. And to cast a variable, it's very easy. Okay, so let's see with an example. Let's say you want to cast a string, okay, so we have the string here. A is a string. So if I do type A, I have string. I want to cast a to an integer. In this case, I simply do int a, okay? You simply use the final data type you want, and then in parentheses, you put the variable or the value you have now. Okay, if I do int a, you can see now I have 67 without the quotes. And if I do type int a, now this is of class int. So this way you can change a value here from whatever data type it is to the data type int. You can also do the reverse if you want. You can cast something into a string. Let's say I want to cast 34. This is going to give the string 34. You can cast int to float. For example, float from 3 is going to give 3.0. You can do the opposite. Int, let's say 3.0 is going to give 3, and let's see, for example, 3.7. What do we have here? We have just 3, okay? This is important. When you cast a float number to an integer number, the number is going to be truncated, okay? So whatever is after the comma is going to be lost, okay? So that's important to know. And then, so we can also cast a boolean to an integer. Let's see that. Int true is going to give 1, and int false is going to give 0. Okay, so actually, if you want to see a boolean with numbers, well, when you have 0, it's going to be false. Okay, if you have 1, it's going to be true. But in fact, if you have any other number, it's going to be true. Okay, if you want to do, let's say, bool from 34 is going to be true. Bool from -1 is going to be true. The only value which is going to give false is 0. Alright, and with that, you can cast any type to any other type. Alright, that's the end of this tutorial. Actually, this tutorial is just the first part of my course named Practical Python for Beginners. where you have 3 more sections to learn all the Python fundamentals and many exercises to practice more. Then if you are also currently learning robotics programming with Python, well, check out my other content on this YouTube channel. I also have many courses to program robots with Python, for example with Raspberry Pi and Robot Operating System. You can find some links in the description of this video. Alright, thank you for watching and see you in another course or tutorial.